Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Richard, I'm Nigerian and I review Pakistani dramas. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at episode 4 of Barzakh. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're interested in these reviews, and if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. Episode 4 of Barzakh, in my opinion, is the best episode of the series so far. It touches on a lot of very deep and complex themes. The cinematography is beautiful as usual, and it is a very impactful episode. A lot of the stuff they show in this episode, it really sticks with you. It gets you thinking a lot after watching it, and it also explains a lot of what is going on in this story. In this episode, we learn about how Shahryar's wife, Lena, died. We see that she had postpartum depression and she just couldn't really cope with it, and she ended up committing suicide by drowning herself in the bathtub. I think the actress who played Lena did a fantastic job showing this. You could really see the sorrow on her face. She never really seemed happy, but it seemed like she was just trying her best to keep going, but she couldn't do it in the end. It's a very deep, heavy scene to stomach, especially if you've gone through that before or if you know people who have. And what I find interesting is that we know that Shahryar is a psychiatrist, but even with all his accomplishments in that field, he couldn't really help his wife with that. And I think that just shows you that a lot of these instances of postpartum depression or postpartum psychosis, they're very complex. You cannot just expect somebody to snap out of it, or you can't just expect that helping them would be a quick fix. It's a very complicated journey. And so this was a very powerful storyline that I feel they were really showing us in this episode. But I guess the question is, was Lena selfish for killing herself? A lot of people will say that she is, but I just think that she was struggling, like a lot of mothers do. This is a very difficult thing, and especially as a man, I can't possibly understand how it might feel for women who have postpartum depression. And so I think it would be unfair to say that she was selfish for killing herself. And this is drawing a parallel to what Akka said at the dinner table, and that dinner scene, we'll talk about it soon, but that was probably one of my favorite scenes in this whole drama. But Akka basically says that Lena didn't have the courage to go on, so she killed herself. A very insensitive comment, but as I said, I think it is quite unfair to say that anybody who went through that journey and ended up committing suicide, as Lena did, was being selfish. After this flashback scene with Lena, we see that the painter, that lady who sits in Mahtab Mahal painting, she painted a picture for Haris, specially addressed to him, and that painting is of his mother in the bathtub. And I think this is quite interesting because I've noticed that this lady, there's always a painting in every episode for somebody who is struggling with something. We saw the same thing with Saifullah in the last, I think it was episode 2 maybe, and we're seeing it now with Haris. And we're seeing that this woman is always painting something that is symbolically important for the episode. Later we see Shahrazad going into the market to buy mushrooms or psychedelics, and she asks Lorenzo to put it in the food for the adults. And this leads up to the big dinner scene, which I felt was fantastic. The acting was fantastic in this scene. The symbolism was fantastic. The dialogue was fantastic. Everything about it was very raw, very real. I felt like they really did a good job of bringing out a lot of the complex emotions in this scene. But I really like this scene because I feel like all the grievances, all the issues that the characters have with one another, they all came out. We can see that Saifullah is very upset with his father about how he abandoned them and now is wanting to marry this woman who is dead. And we see Akka talking to Shahryar about how he's not raising Haris right. He says that Haris is too free, and he tells Shahryar, like, this is your son, not your wife. You guys talk as if you're just friends, as if you're lovers. And I think this is interesting because I mentioned this, I think it was in the first review I did on Barzakh, where, you know, they have a very easygoing relationship. It doesn't really seem like a father-son relationship. And, you know, different people will have different opinions on that dynamic. But I think it's important because it shows that the father-son dynamic or the parent-child dynamic is not one way. There are different kinds of dynamics. Everybody's family is different. And in this case, this is what it is. But Akka basically says you need to give your son space to be a man. And wow, you could see that that really hit Shahryar. It really got him in a sore spot. And Sharia also was able to voice his own grievances, and he says that Aka was a terrible father. But I think more so, the deeper issue that Sharia has with Aka is the fact that when Lena died, Aka did not really comfort him at all. Instead, he said that she was not courageous enough and that's why she killed herself, and that's life. Very insensitive thing to say, especially as a parent saying that to a child. Very insensitive. So it's no surprise that Sharia has not moved on from that, and he doesn't really respect Aka. He doesn't see him as a positive figure in his life. And on top of all of that, Haris finds out how his mother died, and of course he's upset with Sharia for not telling him the truth. And you know, this is one of those situations where children get upset with their parents for certain things, but it's because the parents are protecting the children from finding out the real truth. You can't expect Sharia to tell a small child like Haris how his mother actually died from suicide. But you know, the mind of a child, Haris is obviously going to feel like his father lied to him. And again, they do have a very easygoing relationship. So it's almost like Haris is expecting his father to treat him as a friend, like just tell him anything. But obviously there are some boundaries with a parent-child relationship, which I think is what Aka was trying to get Sharia to understand. But the scene is very complex, it's not a straightforward scene. It's very uncomfortable at times, and I think, funnily enough, this is how a lot of family interactions go, because you will find that it's amongst families that there's a lot of pain and a lot of repressed emotions. So I think this did a very, very good job of showing that to us. Now, the big question that I had watching this episode is, why did Scheherazade have to use psychedelics to get them to open up to talk about their feelings? Was that really the only way or the best way to get them to do this? I don't know. I'm not saying I have a better answer, but I just felt it was interesting that that was the choice she went for, and that was the choice that the director went for this drama. Because at times watching this, it almost felt as if Scheherazade was kind of like a villain, you know, an evil character. I was questioning her intentions with this. But clearly we know that the men needed to address their issues. The psychedelics helped them to get to that point where they became vulnerable and were able to express themselves. But it's quite funny that they were essentially drugged. They didn't know they were taking psychedelics in their food. So symbolically, they got to this point of being vulnerable against their own will because they didn't want to get to that space. And I think that's where Scheherazade is saying, this is how I will help them get to that point. But I still think it's a very strange and interesting choice that she made. But during the trippy scene when they had taken the psychedelics, Aka confesses that he knows about Saifullah's sexuality. And he was also having illusions of his children reminding him that he was a terrible father. Shahryar also reminds Aka about how he called him ungrateful when he was younger. And that same day he had called Haris ungrateful. And so he was wondering if he was repeating the cycle of being an insensitive father figure. And really in this episode, we could see it honestly that Shahryar really wants to be a good father to Haris. He doesn't want to repeat the generational trauma that the family had experienced. And we see this in a scene where he is talking to his mother's spirit or ghost. And she talks about how the trauma is going to be passed down, and he stops her from saying it'll be passed down to Haris because he doesn't want Haris to go through the things he went through. Now, another interesting scene is the one between Saifullah and Lorenzo, the chef. And Saifullah says that he and Aka are the same man. And what he means by that is that both he and his father are chasing something that they cannot have. Obviously, Aka is chasing this woman, his love, that he cannot have because she's dead. And Saifullah, I think, is referring to his sexuality and what he may want in a relationship, but he cannot have because this is something that he is struggling with internally. And at the end of that scene, Lorenzo basically tells him to live for himself instead of living for other people. And I think this is an interesting thing, regardless of what our thoughts are about, you know, the depiction of homosexuality and all that stuff. I think on a human level, a lot of people who are lonely and vulnerable, they can relate to that advice. Because sometimes a lot of people just find themselves trying to live how other people want them to live, and they don't really do what they want to do. They don't really feel comfortable. So I think that piece of advice from Lorenzo was a bit freeing for Saifullah, and I think it would change how he, you know, just lives life going forward, and we may see more of that in the remaining episodes. But in the end of this episode, we see that Shahrazad allows the village men to enter Mahtab Mahal to offer their prayers to the ancestors. And she arranges it so that they can come in when the men are drugged with the psychedelics. And again, I think this is symbolic because the whole show, we've seen Shahrazad trying to act as a bridge or a link between two sides, always. She's trying to act like a bridge between the physical world and the other world. She's also trying to act like a bridge between Akka and his sons. And again, she's trying to act like a bridge between Akka and the villagers. This essentially is Shahrazad's whole character, a link between different worlds. We have been seeing that gradually throughout the show, and I think maybe the final episode will show that more, where she physically becomes a link between the two worlds. But until then, we will just have to wait and see what the remaining episodes bring. So that is my review of episode 4 of Barzakh. As I said, fantastic episode, by far the best one, and I hope episode 5 can be even better. But thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and please put your comments in the comment section. I really want to know what you think about this drama, what you're liking about it, what you're not liking about it, what you don't understand, everything. Just put it in the comments and we can have some gupshup about it. But thank you so much for watching, guys. Take care, and I will see you in the next one.